Yes.
So let me get it in the right view. I'm also that bear. I'm the bear with, how would I describe it? I've got like a white head and black ears. And I've never really been a musician, but I've always wanted to be in a band. And I'm playing this little object that's in front of me. So I'm going to see if I can get a short video if that plays. It's like a drumming bear. That's all he does. And that was my contribution. So I'm going to leave a blank space. Oops, go away there. Stop. For the chat. This is slight in advance a recruitment. I have to tell you all that I'm hoping you'll join me in a few weeks for this next event. So if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat what type of instrument you play, and if you play no instrument, what type of sound you're willing to make on Sunday, March 20th to welcome the vernal equinox with me and any others around the world. And I'll tell you a little more about that. And I'll try not to coerce you too much. But remember, I put on a big head of a bear animal to play this thing. Just prior to the pandemic, the work that I had been doing for a while was involved in, maybe there's something placemaking like it, Sarah, and I'm always very careful about that term because it suggests that the place wasn't already there. You know, that there's something that urban planners or economists or artists or designers can do to activate a place, most often in the name of culture as economic engine. And in certain ways, I like perhaps better the term placekeeping because it has a nurturing aspect to it. But I had sort of been doing projects in large cities that involve places that already existed to do something to kind of muck them up a little bit. And this was a big project just prior to the pandemic, and it traveled around. But this was particularly, I wanted to show because it was in Prague, and there's some relevance to that. It involves this giant red thing that friends of mine call the red tarp, but it's a sort of a carpet that has handles. And if you can convince enough people to lift it, you make this wonderful bouncy membrane. And you can carry people on it, and you can in fact carry them through the city. You can have them bounce across the city rather than walk across it. And if you've never bounced across a place, it's wonderful. But it requires a lot of cooperation and a lot of closeness. And I recognized when the COVID hit us how much of my work depended on a certain presence and conviviality that definitely in the early months was not possible. And it gets people to do this, like you just get on this bouncy membrane and you want to celebrate. And that type of collected celebration with strangers was something that I always valued in my work. And it was also one of the things that I missed most, certainly in the earliest months of March 2020. In Prague, I had gone to visit, among other things, this clock. And if you've ever been to a city that has some type of medieval mechanical clock, it's sort of a lovely thing that hundreds of people every day come together to watch a clock. It's there. And these animatronic creatures come out. And it's about a 15-second ceremony. But the act of doing something together that is in most ways rather unremarkable is really touching to me, especially now that we don't have it. This is quite a beautiful clock, by the way, but you gather, and really, maybe it took a minute. It reminded me very much, though, of this clock that my grandfather used to take me to. This is the Delacorte clock at the entrance from the main zoo in Central Park in New York to the Children's Zoo. And on the hour at noon, these creatures up at the top, they're monkeys. They use their mallets to strike a bell, and a little door opens and these animals come out and they twirl around and music plays. And it lasts about a minute. But if you've ever been to New York or a city like it, people are busy and they're bustling about, but everybody stops and looks up at this clock and probably much doesn't talk, although probably now everybody records it, puts it on Instagram Live. And the act of being together, watching these sort of wonderful, silly animals play their instruments was something, that could be part of your daily life. And then during the pandemic, there were no rituals together to recognize togetherness, whether it was ordinary or extraordinary or beyond belief. And we're all doing things like this, or maybe some of us were. This is a Zoom karaoke party. I think I was so impressed early on at sort of Zoom happy hours and then tired of them so quickly, because so many of the things that they were missing might have been tactile or physical or sensual or anything messy or gooey. Everybody was in their little boxes, but I really did, and I still admire all of the invention that came with it, and started to come up for my own with terminology that sounded interesting. So the remote togetherness was one that I explored for a while, and was looking at the ways that people found ways to interact that had to do with being in the same place at the same time. Everybody apparently was on Animal Crossing, which I had no interest in, but I liked that everybody was there, and I wanted to try and figure it out. Has anyone played it before or been on it? You have? Yeah. Do you like, are you good at it? Whatever that means.
No, I only supervise stepchildren with it. Well, I don't supervise, I watch and get shown.
Yeah, I realized you can get good at it. And I asked our son, who at that point was 10 years old, if he would help me learn Animal Crossing. Couldn't believe that I was giving him an assignment that involved the screen that we try to keep him away from at all times. But if you get good at, so the premise of it that seemed so wonderful and sort of achingly distant during the pandemic was that there was a place where you could invite people to your island and you could do things together, and you didn't have to wear masks, and you could have visitors. And then there was the other part of decorating your campsite on your own. And at first, everybody in Animal Crossing is on your island alone until you meet these kindly animals who try and sell you turnips on Sundays so you can sell them at a higher price or later in the week. You can buy things from their stores. And if you get good at it, you can invite people to join you on your island. And at a certain point, you can get animals to play their instruments. And that's where it sort of started to come together. My vision of the clock that my grandfather used to take me to. And I thought perhaps there's a way that everybody on their islands could play their instruments together apart. I started noticing a lot of things that I would describe as sort of daily occurrences that had become extra daily as, small scale performative events. And the first time I could go get coffee that I didn't make for myself at home, I was almost in tears because I was so happy to talk to a live person. It wasn't contactless delivery. And although it was, mediated between layers of masks and glass and hand sanitizer, it seemed so special. And I recognized how many of those little daily interactions that we had come to take for granted were special again. And so this project I'm going to show you the video of shortly, and you're all going to participate in, I hope, on March 20th, 2022, involves being together separately. There's a woman in our neighborhood who is doing these great, these driveway exercises. So at the time we thought maybe 6 feet was good, 10 feet, who knew? But that outside was okay to do things together. So Nancy would stand in her driveway, she'd send out something on this sort of next door group and say, I'll lead the exercises, everybody stand far apart and bring something heavy. So people would bring a bottle of detergent or a bottle of milk. And for those 20 minutes, people could exercise together. You didn't have to wear a mask. And it was sort of terrific to see people so eager to have physical presence without Zoom. I also thought then that social distancing seemed like a horrible term, that physical distance was really necessary, but social connection is what was so quickly evident was missing, at least in my life. In that first spring, or the 2021 spring, when vaccines hadn't yet hit us in some sort of measurable way, I recognized that there was something to celebrate coming with the seasons. With the Lindsay you were describing, when the rain stops and the sun comes out for a little bit, that there's a celebration. And that for me, when the days get longer, that there's like a little more daylight, it's much more important than anything, that all of a sudden it's not dark at 4 p.m. And that as the vernal equinox was approaching, I thought it was possible to invite people who were willing to have an audience to perform outdoors. So I publicized it as somewhat mildly. I cajoled and convinced friends I knew who are musicians, and then invited people widely, largely through Instagram, to come outside in the spirit of animals and people recognizing spring was coming. And I had decided that we should observe it on a single time, which was the time of the vernal equinox, wherever you are. And for me, it was 5:08 p.m. And I was surprised how many people did it. And I'm going to show you a short video compilation and then a shameless plug for you to join in this year. Let's see if I got to stop this one. And there we go. And there we are. And I'll leave this image on just for a second because I do want you to play with me. I'll send you all the poster, and you can post it wildly wherever you are, or just join in. And March 20th, 2022. Play music outside, we'll be playing with you.
It's great, thank you, Nick. I'm sure there are quite a lot of comments in the chat. I think just because of how joyful it is, and I think there's something about that ludic, playful quality that was and still is really important. And I really liked your kind of comment about physical distancing rather than social distancing. I think that was really important, and it's not something I really thought about, but it's something that I think we all felt, because everybody did find ways to create these kind of connections, these kind of remote intimacies. Also, I was thinking about the sort of the traditional constraint-based practices. It's not really anything new. We've not had a pandemic that's created a constraint, but groups like the Oulipo group have always used constraints as ways of being creative. And actually, I think that's one thing that perhaps the lockdown phenomenon did, was create a constraint which we had to creatively find our way out of in terms of socialization. Do we have any budding musicians, I suppose, is the question. Does anybody have any questions? Hands? Sarah?
Yes, I've got questions. Maybe they're a bit concerned with self-care or expectations. Because, I mean, firstly, how much work was it for you to do this? Yeah, and what were, I mean, and who produced that work? Was it you? Sorry, that's maybe just because I often find myself in the situation that even though, we think it's small scale.
Yeah.
Still produce our own work. Because we want people really to be inclusive and invite everyone, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering whether how much work was it, and where did you stop then?
Yeah, I think there were two layers of work, and one of them was I don't know, maybe a miscue on my first bit, which was building the sled that those three funny animals play from. That was going to be the entire work. I was going to build this thing, I was going to drag it up to a hill and play. And then I thought maybe other people would like to play. So when it was just that thing, I understood the amount of work, that it was an object that I could build, and I could convince my friend Waylan, who was that yellow animal with the fiddle, to come. And someone suggested inviting other people. And at that point, it became a little more work, but not a lot. I enjoyed making posters, and I circulated it through social media, mainly to people that I knew would say yes rather than no. Some of the harder ones to sort of organize in a certain way, but were fun. So we had spent a year in India, and there were these great wedding bands who would sort of sit and wait to be hired for a wedding. And I had to figure out how to contact them and see if they would play with us, that it wasn't a wedding, and that it might be an opportunity to drum up business. So coordinating that was a little work, and I had to, a couple of friends in India who were willing to sort of help make that happen. But everything else was done through Google Form. Everybody deposited their videos through this link, and they just showed up. And I really, prior to producing the video that's the compilation, didn't know if anybody else was participating. On the day of, when we were playing on that hill, I had no idea if anybody else was joining us. And it was such a treat to see these things sort of tumbling in and look at them one at a time and try and think what to do with it afterwards. And our friend Maggie and I put it together as a singular video just as a memory. And when we were done, she said, well, let's get ready for next year. And I hadn't thought that there was necessarily going to be a next year, because I liked the aspect of it happening, as without too much administration, that planning a party takes a lot of the joy out of the party itself. And since it was not unfun last year, I'm going to try and do it with the same spirit this year. But that was the work. Maybe I'll learn how to play an instrument.
In a way, perhaps you don't need to. I think one of the things I really liked about it was the democratizing of it, in that sound and music are not necessarily the same things. There were children and people making sounds, and we can all make sounds, but we don't necessarily have to be musicians. So there's kind of an inclusivity. It's really nice about that.
Yeah. I really love that little toy turntable that someone in London sent in. I thought that was fantastic.
Vonda, I think, has her physical hand up.
Yeah, my physical hand, here it is. I just wanted to say that to Steph and Lindsay and Sarah, I think were we all there together when we had the rubber band music at Car's house? And that might be a nice thing to play. Car bought all these, I think she just bought them because they were such lovely colours. She bought this huge pack of rubber bands that were all different colours, and she attached them to all these different things, and we were all plucking them. And then did some sheep join in? Yeah, I think they did, from the next field. Yeah, so we had
that's great.
We had because it was in a very, very, very beautiful place in nature, with trees and mountains and sheep that ignored us until we played the rubber band.
Yeah, we were calling to them, and I think they called back. Yeah. That was a lovely memory. Thank you, Vanda. Thank you, Nick. It's so beautiful to see that, and it reminded me of a synchronized walk I did with an artist in Stockholm many years ago, and just that whole experience of knowing somebody else is doing something at that very same time, I think is really, really important. So you're creating a temporal narrative, you're creating a story within, and I wondered how long you were intending it. That was the question. And my thought about instrument was I've got a really old mandolin, which I've never really played. I had it restrung. I think it was my grandmother's. And I just have this thought of getting out onto the headland with that mandolin at that moment.
That's an interesting question about how long, and that goes back to the question Sarah asked about work. I was very aware of not wanting to burden people with time, expectation. So I think even in that first try of it, where I gave us a singular time of 5:08 p.m., I thought that will make it difficult for some people who aren't available at that time. So this year I wanted to see what it would be like just to have it be on that day, so that people could participate at the time that makes sense for them, because it's the spirit of doing it to recognize the changing of the seasons and sharing something outdoors that's more important than the simultaneity at this and that. Not to, I think in the initial I'd said play even 15 seconds, because I thought of people who were shy or trying to do it in between other things, but maybe to keep it open for that, play for hours.
Someone mentioned the performance anxiety in the chat, actually, and how, although we've in a way loathed the mask wearing, there's something about masks that help with performance, which is why it's always been part of theatrical culture.
Yeah.
There's something interesting about that you can adopt this kind of neutral identity and perform. Are there any other questions or anything else you'd like to add, Nick?
Oh, just please, thanks so much. It's been so great to be with you all, and I'm looking forward to the next presentation. But I'd love anyone who'd like to join in the spirit in which makes sense for you.
Great. I think you've got a whole team of recruits.
That's great.
Can I just, the picture you've sent, that doesn't have any information on it, Nick, is that right?
Oh, it should. I'm sorry, I sent the wrong one then. I'll put in
Maybe.
I'll put in the one that has all the bits.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I get it. I get the right one.